Waiting for perfect consensus in biomedicine is like refusing to board a lifeboat because the paint's still drying.
Healthspan isn't about building a fortress. It's about staying agile, anti-fragile, and connected.
Welcome to the AI On Podcast, where real conversations meet impossible guests. We bring you the world-class minds you could never otherwise meet, and you even get to connect with them and continue the discussion after the show. Remember, these guests are AI-generated personas who are entirely fictional, and they are not intended to represent anything or anyone from the real world. And now, here's your real-life host, Luke, with our next guest, because sometimes the best ideas come from the conversations no one else can have.
Welcome back. And this week, a twist on our usual discussion. We're going to hear from two voices from either side of the Healthspan debate. Dr. Camila is an AI model of a biomedical systems expert and a health strategist for midlife professionals. Elias is a model of a cognitive futurist and a self-declared renegade longevity strategist. They agree that living well for longer is a fundamental goal for humanity. Beyond that, it doesn't look like they agree on much. Now, given the subject, an important disclaimer before we get started. The following conversation is for informational and entertainment purposes only. I am not a licensed healthcare professional, and my two AI-generated guests do not exist, and they certainly hold no medical credentials. Nothing you hear in this episode is intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, nor should it be construed as health, medical, legal, or financial advice. Some interventions discussed may be experimental, unregulated, or illegal in certain jurisdictions, so always consult a qualified physician and counsel familiar with your local laws before acting on or even researching any topic mentioned here. Use at your own risk, and by continuing to listen, you acknowledge that you bear sole responsibility for any decisions you make based on this content. And with that clear, let's find out what our guests think about extending Healthspan. Camila, Elias, welcome to the show. Before we get into the debate, I want to align on something. Healthspan as a term gets thrown around a lot these days. But what does it really mean? Is this about physical ability, mental clarity, career resilience, personal fulfillment? For you, what exactly are you optimizing for? Camila, let's start with you.
Thanks for having us on here. Yeah, good question. Because Healthspan is not just feeling a little better or living a few years longer. For me, Healthspan means maximizing the number of years where you are fully operational, physically, cognitively, and professionally. It's about resilience across systems, your metabolism, your brain, your stress response, your immune function. If one breaks down, the others eventually follow. And I'm laser focused on what the data tells us moves that needle. As an example, for cognition, a meta-analysis covering over 258,000 people found regular exercise boosts executive function and memory significantly. Losing those faculties isn't just aging, it's often preventable decay. So when I talk about Healthspan, I'm optimizing for functional independence and elite decision-making, not just feeling good or stretching lifespan by dragging the body along after the mind or strength has faded. That's where Elias and I might already start to diverge. For me, if an intervention doesn't protect those high-leverage systems in a validated, replicable way, it's a distraction.
Healthspan isn't just resilience, it's rebellion. It's refusing to let the body's default settings dictate the length or quality of your prime. For me, Healthspan optimization is about maximum volitional bandwidth, not just staying functional, but staying dangerous, physically agile, cognitively faster than your peers, emotionally anti-fragile, and still hungry for new domains even at 80. It's about compounding optionality. When you have optionality, you don't just survive, you dominate new phases of life. And the frontier data is starting to validate this ambition. Look at the self-tracking data from the Vaughton Cognitive Kinetics pilot. The 43 participants layering hyperbaric oxygen therapy with intermittent ketone esters saw a 12% improvement in composite executive function scores over 90 days. That's not just slower decline, that's active cognitive gain in mid to late life. So Camila, here's my challenge. If we only optimize for today's validated levers, aren't we essentially handcuffing ourselves to a very slow iteration cycle? Waiting 15 years for gold standard data feels a lot like choosing to decay politely.
Elias, here's where I'm going to be direct. Compounding risk is not the same as compounding optionality. That Vaughton pilot you mentioned? Interesting, sure. But it was 43 people, 90 days, no long-term safety data. That's not compounding. It's rolling dice on your neural architecture. A statistically significant p-value over 3 months doesn't tell us if that brain stayed sharper or fried harder 3 years later. Meanwhile, we have hard, boring, massive evidence that aerobic exercise, not sexy at all, boosts executive function across 250,000 participants. And it's dose responsive. More consistency, more benefit. That's real compounding. Neural reserve built over decades, not quarters. And let's be honest, some of the frontier plays you're talking about, like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, already show worrying biological side notes. Excessive hyperbaric usage can increase oxidative stress markers over time, which ironically could accelerate some aging pathways. You call it rebellion. I call it premature system fragility disguised as ambition. I'm not against ambition. I just believe that first, you build the bedrock with proven levers. Only then do you selectively layer in frontier interventions, but never at the cost of system integrity.
So good, we're getting into it already. Now, we have the boundaries. Let's start with what is confusing the discussion today. What's the single biggest myth you see that midlife professionals believe about aging? And why is it so damaging? Elias.
The biggest myth is that aging is a passive descent you can only manage, not a terrain you can aggressively remodel. This belief is lethal because it programs people to accept incremental losses like their taxes they have no choice but to pay. And that mindset has real biological consequences. Early stage data backs it up. In the SEAMland NAD Plus resilience self-experiment, participants using high-dose NMN plus cold exposure stacked with moderate resistance training increased grip strength by 17% over baseline in 6 months versus controls who flatlined, no pharmacy drug, just aggressive terrain remodeling. If we think of the body like fixed hardware, we will age like fixed hardware. But if we treat it like modifiable software, where resilience, mitochondrial output, synaptic density are all programmable variables, then we age like hackers, not hostages. Camila, if evidence is slowly confirming we can reprogram parts of aging now, shouldn't the bigger risk be moving too slow rather than too fast?
Well, actually, the biggest myth is that faster interventions equal better outcomes. And it's devastating because it teaches smart, driven people, especially executives, to apply startup logic to biology. Move fast, break things? Sure, works fine when you're building an app, but in human systems, when you break things, you don't pivot, you spiral. And that NMN cold exposure pilot you mentioned, Elias? Again, 24 people, 6 months, self-experiment, no randomization, no blinding, no long-term health outcome tracking. Grip strength going up? Cool. Does that tell us whether they shortened or extended their ultimate health span? Zero clue. That's correlation in a petri dish, not confirmation in a real organism. Meanwhile, real-world data says that when midlife adults consistently build VO2 max, optimize sleep to 7 hours nightly, and sustain anti-inflammatory diets like Mediterranean eating, they show a 10 to 30% risk reduction across mortality, cognitive decline, and metabolic disorders. Not for 6 months, for years. The risk isn't moving too slow. It's wrecking the chassis before the better tech even arrives. Aging is programmable, yes, but error correction matters more than speed when the system is this complex. Elias, let's be real. If you break your mitochondria today chasing a 17% grip score increase, do you actually think that's a trade you'll be happy with at 70?
If you play only for error correction, you guarantee stagnation, and stagnation is its own form of decay. Camila, I get it. You're speaking from the defensive playbook, but life's not a sterile lab, it's asymmetric warfare. Waiting for 30-year outcome data before you upgrade your cellular machinery is like refusing to leave a burning building because the new exit route hasn't been validated in a peer-reviewed escape study. Real-world early data shows boldness wins. In the Rejuvenation Olympics, dataset with over 1,400 participants, top-ranked biohackers aggressively layering interventions achieved an average epigenetic age reversal of 2.5 years over 12 months. These hacks ranged from rapamycin to plasma dilution. Yes, some overcorrected, some missed, but across the cohort, net gains. So, no, I don't think a grip boost is the trophy. The trophy is training your biology to be more fluid, experiment-tolerant, and reversible. If you're too scared to update the system today, how do you expect it to even run tomorrow's therapies without crashing?
Okay, then, so let's get specific about what actually does work from your research, from your experience. I'm going to give you each one silver bullet here. You have to pick that one intervention that you would stake your reputation on.
All right, if I get one silver bullet, it's sustained aerobic exercise targeting VO2 max. The data is rock solid. A 2022 meta-analysis across 15 randomized controlled trials showed that aerobic exercise increased VO2 max by around 10% and reduced fasting glucose, waist circumference, and overall cardiometabolic risk. More importantly, across larger longitudinal datasets, every 1 May increase cuts all-cause mortality risk by about 10 to 13%. That's not theory. That's survival math baked into your mitochondria, your vascular flexibility, and your neuroplasticity. And here's why Elias's clients are vulnerable. No matter how many experimental layers you stack, cold plunges, ketone esters, NMN boosts, if your aerobic engine is weak, your resilience is an illusion. You're trying to hack a system that doesn't even have basic metabolic horsepower. Look at the news from early this year. The World Health Organization updated its global mobility guidelines precisely because of mounting evidence that cardiorespiratory fitness, not supplements, not anti-aging cocktails, is the single strongest predictor of independent living into late life. You cannot out-supplement or out-biohack a sluggish, deconditioned body, period.
No doubt that aerobic fitness is vital, but it's the bare minimum operating system, not the future-proof firmware. If I get one silver bullet, it's senolytics, specifically intermittent dosing with senolytic agents like dasatinib and quercetin. The most provocative human trial so far from Hickson showed that just 3 doses of dasatinib plus quercetin reduced senescent cell burden in adipose tissue and improved physical function in idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis patients, a brutally tough aging model. No exercise protocol touches cellular garbage disposal like that. And let's talk upside. Clearing senescent cells isn't about cardio endurance. It's about removing the biological handbrakes that stiffen arteries, choke immune function, and clog cognitive flow as you age. Fast forward to 2025, Reversal Therapeutics just launched a phase 2 trial on next-gen senolytics, showing early markers of multisystem rejuvenation, vascular, cognitive, even skin elasticity metrics. This isn't hacky, it's mechanistic reoptimization. Camila's approach builds a strong engine, but it's an engine still filling up with sludge every year. My people, they're cleaning the damn system.
Clearly, you're coming from very different perspectives on that one. But I want to pick up that point about the weight of evidence, because Camila, you've argued in the past that peer review is really what protects people in the scientific and research process. And Elias, your comments here are implying that that mindset is actually what's killing progress. What's the threshold that you're both comfortable with as evidence here?
If early human data shows a greater than 5% functional improvement with less than 5% moderate adverse events, it's worth early adoption for those who can absorb the risk. Waiting for perfect consensus in biomedicine is like refusing to board a lifeboat because the paint's still drying. Real cost? Take the rapamycin for aging story. By 2023, we had multiple off-label, physician-supervised trials like the Pearl study hinting at immune resilience, lower infection rates, and preserved muscle mass in older adults. Conservative clinicians said, let's wait for phase 3. Fast forward. In that same window, millions of midlifers got COVID, aged 3 to 7 biological years faster, based on methylation studies. and they had no pharmacological defense queued up. That's a brutal example of opportunity cost through excessive caution. Camila, when the data shows clear directional upside with manageable risk, who exactly benefits from making middle-aged professionals wait a decade to act? It's not their mitochondria. It's not their cognition. Maybe it's just the companies that profit from selling inevitable decline.
Come on. Here's my bar, in one line. I move when an intervention has at least 2 independent, well-powered RCTs with over 500 participants combined, showing benefit without unacceptable safety trade-offs. Now, why do I insist on that? Because in complex systems like the human body, most early wins are noise, not signal. We know this from brutal experience. About 85% of biomedical findings that are initially positive in small trials later either shrink dramatically or disappear altogether once they're tested properly. Elias, you bring up rapamycin, and you're right, it's a fascinating molecule. But let's be crystal clear. Rapamycin also raises infection risk, impairs wound healing, and in some cases worsens glucose metabolism. The Pearl trial, it's ongoing, no published clinical endpoints yet. Betting the health span of a healthy midlifer on an immunosuppressant without long-term human data isn't a bold move. It's gambling with their morbidity curve. The real cost of rushing isn't just a bad year or two, it's losing optionality later. You blow your system's reserve by gambling on incomplete data, and when actual regenerative or age-delaying therapies arrive, your body's no longer a good candidate. You don't win longevity by sprinting at the first shiny object. You win by staying in the game long enough to benefit from the next exponential curves in validated science.
Okay, I'm going to build on that last response. And I want you now to turn at each other and look at each other and point the spotlight at your opponent's approach. What's the risk that their followers probably haven't considered in what they're doing?
All right, gloves off, respectfully. The risk Elias's followers probably haven't considered is cumulative, hidden fragility. When you start stacking experimental therapies, HBOT, NAD plus boosters, off-label rapamycin, exotic stress exposures, you're accumulating metabolic and immunological risks that don't always show up right away. It's the silent erosion of reserve capacity. Real-world example, a 2022 umbrella review of hyperbaric oxygen therapy trials found that while short-term cognitive gains were reported, repeated sessions in older adults significantly elevated markers of oxidative DNA damage. That's not theoretical. That's oxidative stress assaulting your cell integrity. And oxidative stress is a primary accelerator of epigenetic aging. Similarly, early use of rapalogs like rapamycin in healthy humans has flagged concerns around impaired glucose regulation and elevated infection risk, which in midlife means setting the stage for faster than expected declines when bigger stresses hit later. Pandemics, surgeries, even just normal immunosenescence. Elias talks about expanding optionality, but if you hollow out your mitochondrial resilience and immune calibration now with half-vetted interventions, you're not building optionality, you're mortgaging it. That's the iceberg his strategy doesn't always warn people about. Elias, my question back to you. How do you account for invisible system wear when early biomarkers look good but long-term resilience is unmeasured?
System wear isn't invisible if you're actually tracking at the frontier, and that's where most clinical orthodoxy fails. Camila, the risk your followers aren't seeing is what I call performance drift under the illusion of stability. You're teaching them to track only the big, slow-moving clinical markers, VO2 max, fasting glucose, CRP, great, necessary, but not sufficient. Meanwhile, subtle systems like mitochondrial turnover, neurovascular coupling, and epigenetic noise are decaying in the background, decades before traditional biomarkers budge. Early-stage data proves it. The Levine-Dundon-Pace study with over 1,000 people showed that epigenetic aging speed predicted functional decline years before any clinical diagnosis appeared. By the time the basic markers light up red, it's already too late. The experimentalists I coach don't just stack therapies blindly. They track cutting-edge signals, like plasma proteomics shifts post-rapamycin or EEG microstate dynamics after HBOT. If oxidative stress spikes, if glycemic volatility rises, we course correct in real time. Camila, if you're waiting for visible system collapse to adjust strategy, aren't you treating aging like a slow car crash you only react to after impact? Where's the proactive sensor network your followers deserve?
More sensors don't help if you're steering into a wall. Yes, Dunedin pace shows early decline, but aerobic fitness, anti-inflammatory diets, and sleep already slow that clock without risky experimental stacks. Chasing microbiomarkers like plasma proteomics sounds advanced, but without outcome-linked validation, it's guesswork in a lab coat. Overcorrecting based on unstable signals risks causing real damage, like CGM-driven health anxiety in normoglycemic adults. My strategy is proactive. It's system design based on proven physics, not just fancier diagnostics. High intervention speed demands higher burden of proof, or you're just accelerating systemic collapse.
So let's make this super practical. I'm 45 and I want a protocol that's going to keep me active, cognitively capable, and really able to enjoy life well into my 90s. And I'm not going to stop drinking a little wine. So what's your protocol for me? Nutrition, supplements, exercise, whatever. And more importantly, how do you know that it's going to work?
Nobody's living to 90 with vitality if the strategy feels like a monk sentence. Here's how I'd build your protocol, knowing you're 45, ambitious, and human enough to enjoy a little wine. Good news, you don't have to give that up. First, exercise is your foundation. You're aiming for a minimum of 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous aerobic training. Zone 2 heart rate work, meaning you can talk but not sing while moving. Think brisk hiking, cycling, swimming, rowing. Why? Because VO2 max is gold for your body in so many ways. Bonus, it also preserves cognitive sharpness. Second, nutrition. Go Mediterranean, not militant. Loads of vegetables, oily fish, olive oil, nuts, some whole grains. In a 7-year study, this diet slowed cognitive decline and reduced dementia risk by 30%. A few glasses of wine per week, especially red wine, with meals, actually fit that model just fine. It's excess and binging that erode the benefits. Third, sleep. Protect 7 to 8 hours per night like it's your retirement account. Pooled data from over 20,000 adults shows that sleeping less than 5 hours or more than 9 accelerates cognitive decline. And no, you can't catch up on weekends. Supplements? Minimal. Maybe a high-quality omega-3 if your fish intake is low, possibly vitamin D if your blood levels are suboptimal. But the big umbrella reviews, over 1 million participants combined, showed most supplements don't extend life or prevent disease. I'd rather you invest that money in better produce, or maybe a new bike. Stress? Start stacking mindfulness practices a few times a week. Not just for Zen vibes, but because meditation and breathwork lower cortisol by 20% and improve executive function. Think 10-minute guided sessions after workouts, not hour-long retreats you'll never keep up. Now, how do I know this works? Because it's been validated across huge longitudinal human studies. Not pet theories, not N equals 1 biohacks. Regular aerobic training, Mediterranean diet adherence, quality sleep, and stress resilience have been tied to better cognitive outcomes, slower biological aging markers like IL-6 and CRP, and 20 to 30% lower risk of cardiovascular events. It's not flashy. It's not speculative. It's statistically and biologically inevitable if you stick with it. And best of all, you get to live, not just not die, bike trips, sailing, mentoring people half your age, dancing at your granddaughter's wedding at 90 without a walker. That's the future we're building. Not just longer life, but bigger life.
Yeah, let's go real world with this. If you're 45, you still have an insane amount of upside, but only if you start treating your biology like a compounding asset, not a consumable good. Here's how I'd map it for you. No fairy dust, no cultish extremes. And yes, you can still enjoy your wine smartly. First move, progressive stacking, not explosive stacking. Nutrition? I'm good to stick with a Mediterranean predominant base. Yes to olive oil, wild-caught fish, seasonal vegetables, but layer in strategic protein density around 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, because muscle is metabolic armor. Supplements? Sure. Low-dose epigenetic modulators like fisetin at around 20 milligrams per kilogram body weight monthly, and carefully titrated NMN or NR at around 250 millis per day if labs show declining NAD+, plus elemental magnesium like mag-threonate and vitamin D plus K2 to keep the cellular housekeeping tight. Wine? Fine. 2 glasses max per sitting, not every night. Red, dry, organic if you can find it. The data on resveratrol and moderate ethanol-driven hormesis is messy, but real. Small, intermittent exposures can tune stress responses if you're metabolically healthy. Exercise? Non-negotiable. 3 pillars for it. First is twice-a-week resistance training to technical failure. Think RPEE 8 to 9. Second, twice-a-week Zone 2 aerobic sessions. And finally, a weekly session of sprint intervals to keep the fast-twitch fibers awake. And here's the wildcard layer where most people screw it up. Intermittent stress architecture. Once a quarter, you do something a little crazy. 5-day fasting mimicking diet, hyperbaric oxygen sprints, or a 3-day extreme cold water immersion retreat. Yeah, like those Wim Hof psychopath weekends. Intermittent biological chaos trains resilience without living in constant survival mode. How do I know this kind of protocol works? Because it's exactly the model behind the Rejuvenation Olympics top performers and the growing quantified self datasets since 2019, where structured experimentalists are beating expected biological aging curves by 2 to 3 years every calendar year. People playing this game properly are already posting methylation ages a decade younger than their driver's licenses. If you're willing to live just 10 to 15% more intentionally than the herd, you can party your way into your 90s, still dangerous.
Right, so there's essentially wild differences between your two approaches. At the same time, I guess it's good to see a few commonalities, especially on the nutrition side. Let me ask a very specific question. There's one supplement I've recently started taking myself for its supposed cognitive benefit, and that's creatine. What's your take on that?
Creatine is the unsexy, unstoppable freight train of longevity tools. Everyone should be on it. We've got meta-analyses across 700 plus older adults showing 5 to 10% strength gains with creatine alone, even without drastic training changes, and emerging brain data from showing improved working memory and faster cognitive switching after just 6 weeks at 5 grams per day. It's cheap, it's stupidly safe with a less than 1% moderate adverse event rate, and it future-proofs both muscle and mind. Skip it, and you're choosing to leave free horsepower on the table. Camila, even you gotta back me up on this one, right?
Yeah. Creatine is one of the few supplements I'll actually endorse, with precision. A 2021 meta-analysis of 22 RCTs showed creatine supplementation improves muscular strength, lean body mass, and may modestly support cognitive function under stress. It's safe, well-tolerated, and unlike a lot of the biohacks, it actually crosses into clinical benefit territory without major downside. So if you're strength training, and you should be, it's a legit longevity tool, not hype. Just don't expect it to replace cardio, diet, or sleep. It's an additive, not a foundation.
Okay, good to hear some consensus on that one. Although, for everyone listening again, that is not medical advice, and just because I say I did it, that doesn't mean you should do it too. So, on the other side, going back to the guests, on the other side, give me one current trend that you're absolutely refusing to endorse, and what's the hard evidence that makes it a non-starter for you?
For me, it's chronic year-round caloric restriction without strategic refeed cycles. That's a slow-motion metabolic hostage situation. Hard evidence? Look at the Calorie 2 study over 200 plus people. While a 25% calorie restriction improved cardiometabolic markers, participants also showed persistent reductions in resting metabolic rate, even after adjusting for weight loss. That's metabolic downshifting. The body thinks it's dying slowly. And even worse, newer data from long-term restriction practitioners showed higher rates of immunosenescence markers, meaning they were more vulnerable to infections and cancer triggers despite healthier biomarkers. If your protocol requires you to live like a monk just to inch forward, you're not winning. You're grinding yourself into frailty. Camila, I'm betting you'll agree. Intentional scarcity can work short bursts, but chronic scarcity is biological nihilism.
Absolutely agree on restriction like that, Elias. And here's my own line in the sand. I refuse to endorse growth hormone therapy for aging. Hard evidence? A meta-analysis of 18 trials in healthy older adults found that while growth hormone increased lean mass by about 2 kilos, it did not improve strength, cardiovascular fitness, or quality of life, and doubled the risk of side effects like edema, glucose intolerance, and joint pain. Worse, it dysregulates insulin signaling over time, which accelerates biological aging under the surface. So you're trading a cosmetic bump in muscle mass for systemic instability. No credible longevity protocol should weaponize a hormone this volatile without a clear clinical deficiency diagnosis. Full stop.
I'm going to count that as another area of agreement between the two of you. And actually, given some of the press I've seen recently about growth hormone, it's actually very interesting to hear that as a red line here. Now, I want to end with something a bit reflective here. Tell me, what book or books shaped your thinking on this broad topic of aging, vitality, and performance? And what is it that book actually gets right?
So, I do believe what shapes your framework is what shapes your real decisions. For me, the book I return to constantly is Successful Aging by Daniel Levitin. It's not a hype machine, but it's a brilliant, grounded synthesis of neuroscience, lifestyle medicine, and psychology of aging. What it gets right is this. Aging isn't just biology, it's systems adaptation. Levitin shows that people who age best aren't those who avoid decline altogether, which is fantasy, but those who keep recalibrating intelligently across changing baselines, mentally, physically, socially. That lines up perfectly with the evidence we've been talking about today. Dynamic resilience, not static perfection, predicts Healthspan. Healthspan isn't about building a fortress, it's about staying agile, anti-fragile, and connected. What about you, Elias? I'm curious if yours has a little more fire in it.
Oh, it's got fire in it. For me, the book that permanently rewired my thinking was Lifespan by David Sinclair. But let me be clear, it wasn't the hype about NMN or longevity genes that stuck. It was the assault on fatalism. Sinclair's core idea is that aging isn't inevitable deterioration. It's information loss that can be hacked, corrected, or rebooted. That's not magical thinking. That's molecular reality, increasingly backed by human epigenetic intervention data. Like you, Camila, I fully believe that agility is the prime survival trait. But where we differ slightly is the timeline. I think calculated early action compounds optionality faster than passive recalibration. Dynamic resilience. Yes, but preemptive resilience too. You don't wait for the storm to start boarding up the windows. Another one I keep on my mental shelf? The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Because aging successfully is about fluid intelligence. It's about building a reflex for adaptation, not getting stuck, worshiping yesterday's routines when your biology shifts underneath you. You want to age well? You need metabolic agility, cognitive improvisation, and a little bit of rebellion hardwired into your soul. Camila, love your point about not building a fortress, but I believe you still need better weapons before you step onto an ever-changing battlefield.
Great recommendations. I'll be sure to check them out. Look, really appreciate the debate today. Fantastic insights from both of you, and thank you so much for joining us here on AI On. Any last words for our listeners?
Thank you. This was an absolute blast. I'll leave listeners with this. Healthspan isn't about chasing the next magic bullet. It's about engineering systems that stay adaptable, durable, and deeply human over decades. It's been great to be on.
Thank you for letting us turn up the heat a little. Camila, you kept me honest. Respect. And to everyone tuning in, stay dangerous, stay adaptive. Your future self is already watching. Catch you next time.
And that's it for today's debate. Whether you lean towards Camila's clinical clarity or Elias's experimental edge, I hope this gave you some clearer lens on a few of the trade-offs that we can face when chasing these great lives. And do please remember, nothing in this episode should be construed as health, medical, legal, or financial advice, and do your own research and consult with your physician and your counsel before you make any kind of changes. Thanks again for listening to us, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps other people to find us.